This is Rabbanit Leah Sarna and Rabbi David Wolkenfeld. Shalom and welcome to the Straw Hat. We are the official podcast of Anshe Shalom B'nai Israel Congregation, an Orthodox synagogue in the beautiful Lakeview neighborhood of Chicago, Illinois. This week's episode has two segments and an interview. In our first segment, we will talk about tefillah, davening, prayers, and what parts of our regular prayer service are absolutely necessary, cannot be skipped, and what other parts of it are more about the experience and what you're supposed to be thinking about while you're saying it, and maybe you could say less with more kavanah, with more intensity, as opposed to more with less kavanah, less concentration. Second, we'll have a conversation about travel and some of the complexities that are involved with that and Shabbat observance. And lastly, we will have a conversation with Molly Jarrett, a member of our community who runs one of our Shabbat morning programs and also just finished learning all of the Babylonian Talmud with the previous Daf Yomi cycle. Hope you enjoy.
I wanted to talk about not saying things. There are parts of the tefillah, parts of our siddur, where I think if you say every word, you're missing the point. And I wanted to go through some of those points and explain why.
Yeah, just a funny story. When I remember, I think when I was a kid, I don't remember, maybe it was one of my cousins who's not religious or something like that, saw me davening and was like, "Do you read through that whole book every day?" And I was like, "No." But it's not just that at Shacharit you don't say, Musaf for high holidays. Even within Shacharit, there could be pieces that you, in the busyness of your life, decide to skip. So we thought we'd talk maybe about how to make those decisions.
Yeah. So maybe first we'll talk about the parts where we really think it's valuable to say every word really carefully and where each word matters. So the Shema is one of those places, right? The mitzvah is to say the 3 paragraphs of the Shema. Even if you say it, maybe especially if you say it regularly, it's worth slowing down and making sure that you're saying each word carefully and pronounced appropriately and correctly.
And you'd be surprised because you might think, oh my gosh, I learned Shema as a child. Of course I say it right. But actually the things you learn as a child usually are the places
just
where you
decades,
know
the mistakes.
Mistakes.
Mistakes have been caked in for decades. So it's really hardest to say correctly. The Amidah is another place where, according to the Rambam, the point of the Amidah was to allow everyone to have beautiful, eloquent, poetically exquisite prayers. And each theme that's mentioned in the Amidah is important. So the Amidah also, I think every word should be said, whether it's a weekday Amidah or Shabbat or Yom Tov Amidah, each word should be said. But there are other parts of Tefillah where I really believe the point is not to say every word. The point is to accomplish something. And if you do say every word and that's the focus and that's the goal, then it's very likely that one isn't meeting the basic goal of what these parts of the Siddur are for. So a classic example, maybe the key example, most important example of this, I think, is Pesukei de Zimra, these psalms of praise that are added before Shacharit begins in earnest. They are meant to get us into the headspace for prayer and to, you're just walking off the street and start talking to God. You have to work yourself up to that, and that's what Pesukei de Zimra is for. But that doesn't entail every single word. If you, it's not, what are you accomplishing if in order to finish in time with the congregation, you're rushing through and not even thinking about what you say? No, should be done a little bit slowly and carefully so that you are finishing at the same time as the congregation, so you can pray with the congregation. And whatever you're saying is actually having an impact on that goal of getting yourself ready for prayer.
Great. So how should one decide what of Pesukei de Zimra they're going to say and what not?
So as a minimum framework for Pesukei de Zimra, we have Baruch She'amar, which is the blessing before Pesukei de Zimra, and Yishtabach is the blessing after Pesukei de Zimra. So you should say those. It's the blessing before and the blessing after. And the part in the middle, at a very minimum, we should, Ashrei should be said. We saw this in Daf Yomi earlier in this week. Ashrei, Psalm 145, is praised by the Talmud for being an acrostic, an alphabetical acrostic, which is pretty fancy and neat, and it has this beautiful verse, Potech et yadecha umaspia l'chol ratzon, that God opens God's hand and sustains all living things, a beautiful, powerful idea. So it has 2 great things in Ashrei, so that's the core, the pinnacle of Pesukei de Zimra, sort of bare minimum, Baruch She'amar, Ashrei, and Yishtabach, and I think other paragraphs of Pesukei de Zimra should be added based on the ones that speak to you the most, that contain phrases that inspire you. Maybe each day, each week, each month, you pick a different one, and you say it's slow enough that it takes you several minutes as the congregation is mumbling Psukei de Zimra. You're doing your thing and getting in that right headspace and getting excited and geared up and ready for tefillah.
And I also think, though, that it doesn't make sense to kind of pick, say, okay, Baruch Shamar, Asher, Yishtabach, and then one other thing. Like, I think it does make sense to kind of familiarize yourself with the totality of the Psukei de Zimra canon, let's say, because there's so much in there that's so beautiful and so many ways of thinking about God and praising God that are really beautiful and that can come through for you in different times in your life. The first person who ever, I remember saying this to me, was a teacher I had in middle school who said, one time I went through a terrible breakup and I thought, like, there's, like, God's not here for me in this. And then I saw in Psukei de Zimra, it says, Harofeh lishvurei lev, right, that God heals the brokenhearted. And I really connected to it, and I realized that our liturgy is there for you. And I really do believe that, even more so than I did in middle school, that there's so much liturgy, in part because there's so much human experience, and that some of it's you're gonna tap into at different times.
That's an argument for knowing all of it, even if you're not saying all of it, right? If you know all of it, then it's there in your spiritual Rolodex. It's there on your bookcase, so you can pull from, because you know where to find these various themes and phrases, turns of phrase, and beautiful language and imagery. But in terms of, in our standard congregation, you have between 5 and 8 minutes for Psukei de Zimra, so you're not going to say all those paragraphs and let them absorb, be absorbed and transform you. So it should be said, I think, slowly. There's the custom in many yeshivot where I think this was actually originally the universal custom, that there was no chazan, no shlich tzibur for Psukei de Zimra, but the prayer leader would not, on Shabbat, not until Shochan Ad, everyone is on their own in shul, saying their own words at their own pace, and then at Shochan Ad, somebody starts leading prayers, and then on weekdays it would be no one gets up there until Yishtabach. I love that. I think that's like an incredible.
The challenge is you got to show up, 20 minutes before.
The congregation needs the discipline to show up and to then actually not schmooze with friends and read Likutei Pshatim, but actually do some challenging, difficult spiritual work of preparing to pray. But the alternative of how could you possibly have a shlich tzibur as a pace setter for something as personal and private and individualized as Psukei de Zimra? That's sort of the absurdity of what we're doing right now. Everyone is engaged in this really, contemplative, meditative process of getting in that right headspace to pray by saying psalms, and I'm going to tell you the pace at which we're doing it. So
you say it in a way that makes it sound so ludicrous, but if you've ever gone to a meditation group or a guided meditation group,
I've never done. No.
Okay, well, should you decide to go, Mishkan, I think, has one that meets every week. Okay. And if people were interested, we could, roll one out at ASBI too. Not instead of Psukei de Zimra. But the point I'm trying to make is that that's exactly what you're doing. And people go, it's not just that people, some people use the Headspace app and just sit on their own at home and work on mindfulness. But many people go to mindfulness groups where they're actually going through these guided group mindfulness experiences. Okay. So you could think of Psukei de Zimra like that, which is first imagine the heat starts in your toes and then moves up your body and that, right? That. So it could imagine Psukei de Zimra to be like that. But I think one of the hard things is then figuring out how to make it meaningful in that same way, such that you're having a group experience of getting ready for tefillah and praising HaKadosh Baruch Hu together. Yeah,
the Gemara says that the Chassidim Rishonim would spend an hour in some sort of contemplative meditation before each prayer they recited, and the vestige of that is Psukei de Zimra. So it seems like it used to take a lot longer and was something much more meditative.
Yeah, and I would say it's worth thinking for yourself, how do I best prepare for tefillah? I know for me, when I leave my house in the morning on my walk to shul, I say brachot on my walk to shul. My tefillah experience for the day, starts when I wake up in the morning, obviously with modani and whatever, but by the time I get to shul, I'm already doing the thing. And I don't say Baruch Shamar until I get to shul, but everything up until Baruch Shamar I've recited already on my walk to shul, and I find that 10 minutes of walking is a good preparation for me for tefillah in the morning. And I'm sure sure other people have, your cup of coffee could be a similar kind of thing, but it's worth kind of thinking about, what do I need in order to get into a headspace in which I'm going to talk to the Almighty? And that answer could be individual, and Psukei de Zimra could be that answer, but then how do you approach Psukei de Zimra, and how do you approach it productively, such that you're actually fulfilling the goals? And just in case you were sort of listening to this conversation and saying, but it's printed in the Siddur, I have to say every word. So here's another important Jewish book of the Shulchan Aruch saying that maybe you don't have to say every word. The first siman in the Shulchan Aruch, the first entry in the Shulchan Aruch says, Tov me'at tachanunim bekavana meharbot below kavanah. It's better to have fewer prayers said with intentionality than to have many and have no intentionality.
Yes, and Rav Kutner's famous quip, it's also better to have a little bit without intentionality than a lot without intentionality. But yeah, the point is not what you say, it's how you say it, not how much you say. And this would apply, I think, as well to Tachanun, right? Certainly on a Monday, Thursday, the long Tachanun, it's a lot of paragraphs, and I think it's better to say one of them like really slowly and like let the words penetrate you and break you and feel them and let that like express that sadness and that despair and just fall on your face in God's presence, and rather than rush through and say all those paragraphs faster than you can absorb them. This would be true for Slichot. We say on fast days or leading up to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Very beautiful, elaborate poetry.
Most very hard
poetry. Yeah, you could read them in English, maybe read the poems in English, and join in the congregation Hebrew for the Yud Gimel Midot in between, or maybe say one really, really slowly and just let the structure of the poem kind of just like overwhelm you with its beauty and its elegance and the complexity and profundity of its ideas, and rather than you're flipping pages, rushing to finish in time.
Right, like I would say, like flipping pages is not a spiritual practice, but I would say it is maybe an educational practice. Meaning, like when I was a kid, learning how to use the Siddur, learning how to keep up in Tefillah, learning how to identify. I just heard this tune. Okay, now I know it's this page. Then in that case, flipping pages is worthwhile for sure, because you're just learning the mechanics of tefillah. So if you feel like you're a tefillah beginner, then maybe flipping pages in order to understand what's happening in the service and how is that reflected in this book that I have in front of me, then flipping pages I actually think could be worthwhile.
So we spend years and years learning to say the tefillah in time to keep up with the congregation in order to learn not to say them so fast that we are keeping up with the congregation. But I think you might be right.
But I'm there.
Okay.
I think that's what I'm trying to say here.
I think I had this experience when I started teaching, or I found myself making source sheets and translating, primary sources into English for source sheets that I would use for teaching, and thinking, if only I had, such and such, the Ramban in English is like, the Chevelle translation. If only I had a copy of that lying around, I could save me time in like making the source sheets. And I just thought, wow, the irony that I spent so many years in yeshiva learning
how to read the Ramban in the original.
And now I'm spending all my time like polishing after translations so I can make source sheets quicker. But there's some other spheres of life for that irony exists.
Definitely. But yeah, so here's us just saying, like, find pieces of your davening that you connect to. It's really important. And there's certain parts of davening that just are kind of Torah level commandments. Kriyat Shema is a Torah level commandment to say at the right time every day correctly. And the Amidah obviously is a very, very important part of our liturgy, but other parts, find ways to connect to them, because that's actually the point. The point is to feel something. So lots of people have just gotten back from various vacations, travel. It's a really beautiful thing. It's a great privilege that we live in a time and place where travel is, fun and relatively easy. But it does pose some challenges sometimes around Shabbos, and we thought we might talk about that. So the first thing is that you should definitely plan for Shabbos. Whether you're home, whether you're away, there should always be a plan. How is Shabbos going to work wherever I'm going? Am I in a hotel? Have I figured out where the stairs are? Have I figured out how I'm going to get in and out of my room? Have I figured out all the lights and whatever?
All the positive mitzvot of Shabbat? Where am I going to, like, as I'm planning my 2-week itinerary, like, I want to spend Shabbat someplace where I'm going to have, like, pleasant Shabbat meals, maybe even a shul I can go to. But if not, just like can I have like good meals that are going to be pleasant? This day spent without malacha is going to be a pleasant experience for me in the context of my travels? And it's really, I think, very appropriate to have your plans built around Shabbat rather than Shabbat be like an afterthought that gets thrown in.
Definitely. Also, shul tourism is really fun.
Yeah.
I would definitely say like hearing a drasha delivered in, modern Greek, like definitely a highlight. The only word it was this week's parsha. The only word I understood was Moshe.
Same in any language.
Same in any language. And so, but again, it requires preparation. Most of Europe will not let you into shul if you don't prepare in advance and send in a copy of your passport and blah, blah, blah. So that's like another note for travel.
And it's even true that even Chabad appreciates if you tell them in advance that you're going to be crashing for Shabbat and maybe need a meal or something, right? They
like to be paid also, usually.
Right. Yes. So planning in advance, et cetera. Sometimes, and I guess also within planning in advance, like date lines, people sometimes, you're buying your tickets, you don't realize, you think it's a Thursday, you think you're not, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh no, with like...
my flight lands on Friday night.
Exactly. Like you don't realize that flying into Tokyo, whatever, like ends up, you thought you were fine, but actually it's yesterday or something. I don't know. I don't know how these things work. I just know that people sometimes, thoughtful people who are like trying to think about this in a conscientious way sometimes gets tripped up by issues of crossing the date line or, with international travel, just the time zones are not your friends always when you're trying to incorporate Shabbat or Pesach or whatever it might be, like can be tricky.
Right. Or understanding actually what it takes to get from the airport to where you're staying and not realizing like, shoot, there's actually only a boat that goes once a day and it goes, Saturday morning or something like that.
Correct. Right. It's like the river Sambatyon in Jewish lore, right? This was where this Jewish kingdom on the other side of the river, but you could only pass across the river on Shabbat, so no one ever went there, right? So,
yeah.
And also sometimes there are horrific, traffic delays, then, really totally beyond your control. Your flight lands at, you land at O'Hare at 8 a.m. and get into a taxi, and all of a sudden it's sun is setting and you haven't moved. I don't know. That seems a little extreme, but whatever.
From O'Hare, you could probably walk, but yeah.
Things happen, right? Things happen.
And it's the backbone of many a Hasidic story. The Rebbe was traveling from somewhere to somewhere else, and it was Erev Shabbos, and the sun was setting. And in those stories, what happens is you pull over to the side of the road, you take out your bread, Eliyahu Hanavi comes, and everything is grand. However, you cannot rely on that happening to you. So what happens in those exigent circumstances?
Yeah, this is like a complicated, series of halachot, which I don't think we can treat comprehensively, but a few things to be aware of. One is that there's this liminal time between sunset and dark where Shabbat has not descended in all of its biblical force, even though we are very strict about Shabbat starting at sunset. Even before sunset, we began observing the restrictions of Shabbat. In fact, between sunset and dark, which could be, depending on the latitude and time of year, could be 10 or 20 minutes or 40 minutes even. During that Benish Mashot liminal time, things are a little bit more lenient, and especially malacha done through the aid of a Gentile, for example, a taxi driver or a traveling companion, is less severe for the sake of a child, certainly, or even for the sake of an adult whose oneg Shabbos, whose enjoyable Shabbos depends on getting to the hotel room, getting to your in-laws house, getting to wherever it is that food is and you're expected on Shabbat. That is that's one whole series of leniencies. One step more, and I've actually been in a situation of a severely delayed train. This was a train. It was, I don't know if it's still true. Amtrak doesn't own their own tracks south of DC, so I was taking a train into DC where I was spending Shabbat in Silver Spring years and years ago, but I was in Virginia traveling to DC from the south by train, and they're sharing tracks with freight lines, and Amtrak gets booted by the freight lines. They have right of way. So there was an orange juice train that was going through, and we were waiting for it was a tight schedule to begin with, but we were stopped for at least an hour or two on a relatively short.
And I would say I have relatives who do not travel on Friday. Period. Your wedding's in the next sitting over. 15-minute drive, they won't go. Yeah. And that's why. I mean,
there's certainly advantages of not traveling on Friday. There are advantages of traveling on Friday, and so that was the case. Yeah. So we arrived in DC. The Saturday night gets set. We got into it. We took the train to the Silver Spring. The Saturday night set. But I think as we were in the taxi going from the train station to the house we were staying as the sun was setting, and the taxi drive. So I think I don't even recall it. A few things like, pay the driver in advance. And so, and it was, the driver was not Jewish. We had them help us open the door for us and turn on some lights in the place where we were staying. Once we were staying in an empty house that had been vacated. So, and this was all during Banish Meshot. This was all between when the sun set and when it was dark. It was a little, driving through this Jewish neighborhood, seeing everyone outside of our taxi, like walking to shul, sort of like ducking in our seats. But that was actually, I think, like the appropriate thing to do, because our Oneg Shabbat, like the meals, the people who were hosting us, the places where we had meals and beds and all the places, that was all in this location. We could get to that location without violating any, biblical Shabbat violation. It was Banish Meshot, which is not the full biblical Shabbat, and it was through Amir Lenochri, a secondary rabbinic restriction of having Gentiles help us do things for us on Shabbat that we couldn't otherwise, which we shouldn't do normally, but for these circumstances, it's possible. A more extreme situation, Moshe Feinstein talks about a case where you forget to turn off the light bulb in your refrigerator on Shabbat, and let's say this is the old-fashioned incandescent light bulb where
it's fire,
where it's
we consider it fire.
Let's say it's a burning filament, so it's it could be a biblical violation to open that refrigerator door. So that's a case where he says you can ask a Gentile to open the refrigerator for you and unscrew the bulb or take your food out for lunch. And that's sort of an interesting case because you're not going to starve, right? If your refrigerator,
you have like crackers somewhere,
Yeah, you're not going to experience hardship. You're not going to experience hunger, but you're also not going to have like Oneg Shabbos. You're not going to have a pleasant, Shabbos meal unless this Gentile does this malacha for you. And he says in that case you can ask. Well, that could apply if let's say a flight gets in late, a train gets in late, a bus drops you off at the bus depot late. So you're not going to freeze to death, God forbid. You're not going to starve. You're not going to experience real privation, but you're also going to have zero Oneg Shabbos, right? You're going to be spending 25 hours in an airport, in a bus depot, without meals, without a bed. Like, that's not pleasant. It's not hardship. It's not adversity, as that would be understood by like anyone on earth.
Well, no, I mean, it depends who you are. Like, meaning, like, I would not, if a woman called me and said, I'm in a bus depot, is it safe for me to spend Shabbos here? I'd be like, absolutely not. You must leave. It kind of depends who you are and where the bus depot is.
Correct. Let's get to safety in a minute. Let's say an airport, okay? Which maybe people feel a little safer about, maybe. Yeah. Or a train station. I don't know. You're right. So there's no safety concern. There's no starvation concern. There's no hunger or cold, or you're not exposed to the elements in any way. Right. No criminal elements there per se. And it's just a matter of zero Oneg Shabbos. So it seems that also, like Amir Lenochri, having a Gentile do malacha for you, like driving you someplace and taking your money, like that could also be permissible under those circumstances. Again, with caveats and with other details which we can't go into on the podcast, but that might also be just one paradigm to think through. Then the third thing would be if it's not safe. So I think unfortunately maybe it's not safe to be a woman in a bus depot overnight, right? That's probably true in many bus depots. It's maybe not safe to just pull over a car by the side of a road in certain neighborhoods or in certain even deserted stretches of highway. Maybe not so safe, right? Okay, I don't know. Yeah. So that would be a case where if it's actually there's a danger to human life, so then you can keep driving yourself, right? You should do malach yourself if it's not safe to stop the car, right? It's the summer and you don't have a lot of water, and right. You should never be in a Shabbos should not put you in physical danger. That's clear.
So, anyways, the point is when you're traveling, take care, enjoy, make plans for Shabbos, give yourself wiggle room. There's always unexpected things that happen. But if you find yourself in like a really, really complicated situation, just know like it's not like, oh, if I make a phone call to a member of the clergy, they're just going to be like, well, we can't help you, sorry. Right? Like call, there's things you can do, and we can try and be useful in those situations. We're here with Molly Jarrett. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I hear you listen to the podcast during your rather long commutes.
I do. It adds some excitement to the long drive.
So where do you commute to?
I commute to Northbrook every day.
Oh, wow. Because you work at?
Solomon Schechter Day School of Metropolitan Chicago.
Wow. So we're really glad that you live in Lakeview.
Yeah, happy to be here.
And Molly not only is a member of our show, but also works for the show on Shabbat in our youth group. She runs Yeladinu.
It's amazing.
Do you want to say a word about what Yeladinu is and what you do?
Yeladinu is an awesome group that gathers kindergarten and first grade students together on Shabbat morning. We do some davening, we do some storytelling, we talk about the Parsha, and we play games. And have snack.
All the good things, basically. I've heard some wonderful Parsha-related discussion questions come out of the classroom over the weeks. My favorite was, if you were moving without a U-Haul, what would that be like?
Really challenging.
Really challenging, yeah.
TVs, I heard from some friends in Yaladinu, would be really hard to carry, so maybe we should save those for another time, or put them on a camel.
Oh, put your TV on a camel.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. I think we definitely have the timeline right.
Yeah.
Amazing. And so what brought you to Chicago?
I got this awesome job at Solomon Schechter, and I was excited to explore a new community outside of New York.
So you more just like, I heard about this cool show, Anshe Shalom, I want to move.
Also that.
Amazing. Well, we're really glad that you came. And when did you move into Lakeview?
I moved here on July 17th.
Wow, that was a very specific answer.
It was.
And you're originally from New York?
Yes, born and raised.
And even through college, right?
Yes, I started my college journey in Maryland, and then I moved back to New York and finished up my degree at Hunter. So,
great.
Very New York.
Very New York. Well, we're really glad you decided to break out of that and join us here in the Midwest.
I am too. People are very friendly here. Who knew?
And Molly, at some point in your New York born and raisedness, you started learning Daf Yomi at like a ridiculously young age. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I started learning Daf Yomi at the ripe old age of 17. So it was my senior year of high school. It was started somewhat as an angsty teenager, and that's what all angsty teenagers do, I'm sure. I had a Gemara teacher in high school who said, you're asking too many questions, sit in the back of the room, don't ask questions, and you'll get a good grade, and that didn't sit well with me. So
Wow.
I said, I'm going to get really good at Gemara, I'm going to show him, I'm going to learn it all.
Wow.
I never thought I would finish it. And I did.
Amazing. Mazel tov.
Thank you, thank you.
You're sort of the dark horse. We were like planning all this Daf Yomi stuff in the show, assuming no one in the show was finishing. And then I saw on Facebook, like, oh yeah, I finished Daf Yomi. And I was like, what? How is that possible?
Yeah, I really, up until about a month ago, I was still in the mentality, I'm never going to finish this. This is a really large undertaking. And then it got to December, and I said to myself, it looks like I'm going to finish this thing. What do I do? And fortunately, my school was a really wonderful community that was like, we should make a siyum for you. And that was really exciting to celebrate.
That's fabulous. I'm so glad. And what did you do at your Daf Yomi siyum? Did you invite many thousands of black hat wearing men?
So I thought that like the dancing celebratory piece would be a little bit weird if I did. So it actually was a professional development day. So all of the faculty and staff at Schechter came together, and because we have people from a wide range of backgrounds, I got to present kind of what is Daf Yomi, the history of it, some of the highlights of my learning, and then to share with them the last piece of the Talmud. And we were able to celebrate that, and I could say a hadron, and it was very exciting for me, and I cried a little bit.
I mean, it's a 7.5-year accomplishment. That's like a pretty serious thing.
Yes.
Do you want to tell us some highlights of places in which you learned Daf Yomi along the way?
Definitely. I think, well, I took it with me on my gap year to Israel, and that was a lot of fun. So there was a lot of sitting on buses in Israel with Gemara's open in front of me. So conversations I had were definitely fun.
And it was like before you could learn Safari on your phone. Like that was
Yes.
not an option when
No.
you were on your gap year in Israel.
Definitely not. So there were a lot of Sfarim, and there was a lot of like going around to different Sfarim stores in Israel to like buy more Sfarim, and then thinking ahead of, ooh, Sfarim are cheaper in Israel. Maybe I should buy some for next year.
Yeah.
So there's that, and then
Right,
also,
this is kind of an expensive undertaking for you also.
yes, as a college student and as a high school graduate, that was like a good portion of my lovely generous allowance from my parents.
Oh, thanks, parents.
Yeah. So there was that, and lots of plane rides. And
Yeah.
recently, I was really finishing up Masechet Nida largely on a trip to Puerto Rico.
So
was
fun.
Yeah.
Well, your learning should be a schut for all the people in Puerto Rico affected by the most recent natural disasters there.
Amen.
Hopefully, you know, those brachas will radiate out. Oh, wow. Well, anyways, Anshe Shalom is so proud and excited for you.
Thank you.
Did you start the new cycle, or are you moving on to something else?
I started it. I'm not so sure how much longer I'm going to stick with it because I'd like to take my time with some learning now.
Yeah. We've been talking a lot about the difference between Bikut style learning and Iyun style learning. And
I heard.
Daf Yomi is very much Bikut style, and
Yes.
there's room in life for other things.
Definitely.
Yeah, but also, like, you've touched every page of the Bavli. That's an amazing, amazing thing. And we're so impressed and so excited for you.
Thank you.
So someone in the show was like, wow, this Molly person sounds amazing. How do I meet her? I want to learn her Torah. Where would they look to find you?
So I can be found early Shabbat morning under the portrait of the Nitziv at Hashkama. Other than that, I can be found after Yeladinu hanging around Kiddush.
And at Yeladinu, presumably.
At Yeladinu. So we always love guests. People want to come in, share some Torah and some energy. We love it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Straw Hat. As always, thank you to our producer, Haley Leventhal, for all of her hard work in making this podcast possible. If you have positive feedback, we would love to hear that from you in person or by voice note, by email, or call us and leave us voicemail, send it by a fax. All of those would be great options. And if you have negative feedback, as the sun sets on Friday afternoon, you can just chuck that by the side of the road. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful week.